Hello, and welcome to today's live reading of Tracker by DeRudder Jackson, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. The shaman's chant echoed into the last rays of twilight. One by one, the class of young warriors silently filed out of the sacred oak grove, each lost in his own thoughts. At the edge of the shaman's property, Riley Sheridan, his fraternal twin Rio, and their friend Seamus Lachlan climbed into Riley's jeep. For several long minutes, none of them said a word. At last, Seamus broke the silence. That wasn't what I expected. Me neither, Riley said. Why didn't Dad tell us we'd be lost in that weird dream world so desperate to find our way? In the passenger seat, Rio sat sideways, his ankle resting on his knee as he faced his brother. That was your experience? Yeah, wasn't it yours? Nope, I spent however long we were in there fighting zombie champions and wishing for Scat Hat to share a strategy with me. He glanced over his shoulder at Seamus in the back seat. What happened to you? Their friend pulled a face. I was parked on my ass in the tall grass waiting for someone to come along to talk to me. Riley and Rio exchanged a grin. I know that shaman pulled herbs from the same satchel for each of us, Riley said. I was watching. The chant sounded the same too. I mean, she might have hypnotized us or something with the way she droned on in Gaelic, but I'm pretty sure it was the same. So why were our experiences so different? His twin finished for him. Exactly. Probably for the same reason each of us was given a different sign to try on talismans in the community, Rio said. From the back seat came, explain. Rio shot Seamus a duh stare. Each of us has a skill set that our fated mate will complement with her special skill. So it stands to reason we each have a different sign to try on talismans. Yeah, we all learned that in our earliest training. My question is, why were our experiences in that grove so different? Seamus demanded. A rite of passage, the sign ritual signaled the start of each warrior's quest to find and bond with his talisman, his fated mate. From tonight on, it was paramount that each warrior discover the woman who responded to his designated and quite personal sign. Having recently passed their 21st birthdays, each warrior who experienced the ritual now had 7 years to complete that quest or face a life on the run or something worse, turning rogue and joining the Morrigan's evil minions to fight against warriors. Riley shuddered at the thought. Did their vastly different experiences mean something about who was going to find his mate on time and who might not? Maybe it has to do with who our talismans are. Maybe it's a clue to where to look for them, Rio said. Still feeling a bit groggy from whatever the shaman had done to them, Riley shrugged and fired up his jeep. If we drive all night, we should be home by mid-morning tomorrow. That's another thing. Why did we have to take civilian transportation to this event? Seamus groused. Why can't we visualize ourselves here and pop back home when it was over? Because I sure could use a beer right about now. Laughing, Riley put the jeep in gear and backed out of the parking area in front of the classic red barn separating the sacred grove from the rest of the shaman's property. Beside him, Rio pulled on his seatbelt and glared at Seamus in the rearview mirror. You never take anything seriously, do you? Finding and bonding with our fated mates is our highest priority now, and you're pissy because you can't party. He crossed his arms over his chest and stared straight ahead as Riley navigated the narrow 2-track heading out to the main road. Seamus sat forward in his seat. How are you related to Riley again? Or Rowan, for that matter? Because both of them are fun. Riley slid a glance his brother's way and saw him tense. For some reason no one had ever figured out, Rio had always been the most solemn Sheridan brother, relatively speaking. Growing up with a lot of them, it shouldn't have surprised Seamus that Rio would take the sign ritual and its implications so seriously. Riley thought he heard Rio growl under his breath. I am fun. A smile tipped the corner of Riley's mouth. How about we find some food? A hamburger would be fun. With a snort, Seamus sat back in his seat. From the corner of his eye, Riley caught Rio's sarcastic sneer as he reached over and turned up the tunes. Even with Seamus's half-hearted whining and teasing, a quiet mood filled the vehicle. As his jeep ate up the miles, Riley kept trying to figure out what kind of woman the gods had fated for him and why he'd experienced such a profound desperation to find his way in that tiny grove of trees. Glancing in the rear view, he saw Seamus staring out of the side window, a contemplative expression on his face. He didn't need to slide a look in his twin's direction or try to breach his telepathic shield to know Rio was equally preoccupied with thoughts of his own experience and his lady, too. Turning 21 was a big deal in the civilian world, a rite of passage into the full privileges of adulthood that most civilians marked by partying in a bar until they puked. Warriors in their community, men and women of honor who were sworn to protect both the Celtic community and civilians alike, were expected to do their level best to find and bond with their talismans. Instead of celebrating adulthood, they were sworn to create strong fighting units that could take on the Morrigan and her evil armies and best them. Still, Seamus's idea of enjoying a beer after what they'd experienced sounded better and better as they drove through the night on their long diagonal trip from southeast Montana to their home on Flathead Lake. Damn good thing the interstate took us through Billings. I doubt we'd find another all-night diner before my stomach turned inside out, Seamus said, as he climbed into the passenger seat of Riley's Jeep. Rio was taking over this leg of the drive, so Riley slid into the back seat, prepared to nap off his massive midnight breakfast of waffles, sausages, a 3-egg omelet, hash browns, a carafe of orange juice, and a hamburger. It had been a long time since they'd last eaten, having been warned to enter the sacred grove with an empty stomach. By the time the ritual had ended, nothing in the tiny towns they'd rolled through on their way north was open until they reached a decent-sized city. Casinos, bless 'em, served food all night long. Riley rolled up his protective leather jacket and stuffed it in between the seat back and the window, preparing to sleep when Rio let out a low whistle and Seamus braced his hands on the dashboard. That didn't take long, sarcasm coated Rio's comment. The old girl is impatient. I would have thought she'd wait until one of us needed to take a leak somewhere on the side of the road out in the middle of nowhere, Seamus said as he unbuckled the seatbelt he'd just clicked into place. Riley sat up and glanced out the windshield to see a group of 5 or 6 men moving toward them, the bright lights of the Jeep glinting off the claymores they held. Well, at least we get to do this on a full stomach, Seamus quipped as he pulled the handle on the door and stepped out. From beneath his brows, Riley glared at the scene in front of them and slid into his leather jacket before he, too, climbed out of the Jeep. Rio stuffed the keys in his jeans pocket as he joined his brother and their friend outside their ride. As one, the 3 warriors called their claymores to their hands and casually walked in front of the Jeep to face the rogues who had stopped several paces in front of them. One rogue stepped forward, his eyes glowed an otherworldly red, marking him as one of the Morrigan's minions. It appears we outnumber you 2 to 1, gentlemen. Care to wager how this is going to go? As usual, whenever their older brother Rowan or their dad wasn't with them, Rio took the lead, his voice deceptively calm. 6 dead rogues and 3 warriors back on the road home. Cocky much, Rio Sheridan? At hearing his brother's name, Riley gripped his claymore a bit tighter. This wasn't an accidental meeting. Morgan sent these guys with a singular goal. Jesus, he truly despised the old witch and her insatiable need to attack him and his family. Nope, just stating facts. As the 2 exchanged pleasantries, the other rogues fanned out in a semicircle, effectively corralling him and his brother and Seamus between them and his Jeep. From the corner of his eye, he caught the feral grin spreading across Rio's face and hoped Seamus saw it too. Opening his telepathic shield to his friends, Riley heard Rio in his head. On 3, we land behind them. 1, 2, 3. In a blink, the 3 of them had bent time and space to land on the balls of their feet with the tips of their claymores prodding the spines of the 3 rogues who stood in front of the Jeep, including the leader. About that wager, Rio hissed right as the rogue spun and engaged Rio's sword, signaling the fight was on. Without their talismans, the warriors and rogues were somewhat evenly matched. If they had their talismans, the women could have directed them, seen the battle in prophecy or real time, given them orders and commands for how to best the rogues most easily, and the 3 of them would have had the upper hand. As it was, they were on their own in hand-to-hand combat with men who lacked ethics and who, like their mistress, never played fair. Their only ace in the hole was that, unlike the rogues, the 3 of them trained with Skathak, the warrior trainer herself. She'd been drilling them on some moves that used pirouettes more than thrust and parry. Muscle memory kicked in, and Riley put those moves to use, taking out the rogue he'd engaged at about the same time Rio finished off his adversary. Beside them, Seamus was battling 2 rogues at once, with a third seeming to materialize out of nowhere. Riley jumped over the downed rogue in front of him and, with a blood-curdling yell, drew the attention of that third rogue. Like a cartoon character, the man's eyes popped wide open before he dropped into a ready stance. Riley came at him with his claymore spinning, a blurry flash of the streetlights illuminating the parking lot. The rogue tried to focus on some part of him, but this was the first move Riley's father had taught him back when he still jumped in mud puddles and practiced with a wooden sword. Before the man could find his shot, Riley had caught his claymore and spun it out across the pavement. Terror rippled through the man's features, but he was done before he managed to step toward his weapon. A scream somewhere to his right alerted him that Rio or Seamus had had similar success. Another sound penetrated his brain, and he exchanged glances with his buddies. They didn't need telepathy to know now was a good time to hit the road. Without a word, they climbed into the Jeep, and Rio fired it up. Careful to back away slowly so as to leave as little trace of their presence as possible, the sound of civilian police sirens crescendoed from the north end of the parking lot nearest the main road. So Rio spun the wheel toward the opposite exit, taking his time leaving the scene. The scenic route behind the casino took them through a quiet residential area. Rio slowly navigated through several blocks before finding a main artery in the city, one that would take them back to the interstate, where they could safely use speed to escape. From the passenger seat, Seamus snorted. That's it, right there. Riley asked what? The reason we should have been allowed to visualize ourselves to that ritual. He grumbled as he stared out at the passing darkness. I bet we aren't the only warriors Morrigan sicked her minions on tonight. He crossed his arms over his chest. There's something sick and sadistic about trying to take warriors who only hours ago were given their ticket to freedom and a chance at life with a wife and a family, Rio echoed from the driver's seat. Yet here we are. None of us was surprised. Riley angled himself into the corner between the door and the back seat where he could stretch out along the entire back seat. He grabbed his ball cap off the floor where it landed when he jerked his jacket back on and pulled it low over his eyes. Hope the old witch at least came in and cleaned up the mess before those civilian cops arrived, Seamus said. Because even with the careful way you drove us out of there, Rio, obviously someone called that event in. Someone who saw the Jeep and could probably describe it. Morrigan won't be able to help herself. She loves wading in the blood of battle too much to let those boys be discovered by civilian police, Rio said. The driving bass of a rap tune thumped through the cab of the Jeep. You want to find us a different radio station? Something that doesn't make me want to turn this ride around and go back and confront that witchy goddess? Seamus scrolled the dial until he found a country station and left it there. In the light of a passing car, Riley saw Rio nod and let himself relax. When he woke up, a rosy glow on the western horizon told him that they were about 2/3 of the way home. In the front seat, Seamus snorted and rearranged himself where he'd laid in the back seat almost over Riley's legs. Rap played low on the radio again. Sitting up, he rolled his shoulders and turned his head from side to side, working the kinks out from sleeping for 6 hours in the back seat of his ride. I need to take a leak. Are we near a town or something? Maybe we can stop for breakfast. We hit the truck stop outside Missoula at about 10. Rio smirked into the rearview mirror. Can you wait that long? Riley flipped him the bird and he laughed. A long snore interrupted them before Seamus shot forward in his seat. The only thing keeping him from bumping his head on the roof was his seatbelt. What the hell? Where are we? Good morning to you, sunshine, Rio said. Seamus scrubbed a hand over his face. Sorry, I thought Maeve was here. She and her evil twin surrounded us with about 100 rogues. He leaned down and adjusted his seat back to an upright position. Nightmare or something. Maeve, huh? That's interesting. Maka kept showing her face to me all night. Riley stared out of the windshield. Wonder what that's about. Guess I'm glad I didn't take a nap, Rio said. Maybe I'll go on and drive the last 2 hours home after breakfast. Chicken, Riley chucked him on the shoulder. You're going to have to sleep sometime. Yeah, but maybe by the time I do, the herbs that shaman used will have worn off and I won't be trying to jump out of my skin when I wake up. He slid a smirk Seamus's way and their friend shook his head and sneered. Hilarious, Rio. The weird night left its mark, though, and the three of them surreptitiously checked out the parking lot of the truck stop after Rio parked the Jeep on the edge of where they could make a quick exit if they needed to. Inside, it was quiet. And only a couple occupied tables. They chose one by the windows and ordered a mountain of food the waitress needed help to serve. They plowed through their meal without conversation, left a hefty tip, and exited the restaurant the same way they'd entered it, with their eyes wide open for any signs of the Morrigan and her rogues. But all was still. Riley drove the last leg home, but in the passenger seat, Rio didn't relax.